All right, page 71, the off and on us. It is time now for us to start putting together the assumed bizarre behavior of the pendulum or oscillator discussed in Chapter 3. When the distances per unit time at the extreme point through which the pendulum is moving become extremely small, almost infinite or infinite speeds are encountered. But infinite speeds of what? The answer seems to be infinite speed of a non-physical entity, the observer, while the physical body loses its definiteness in space. We cannot know its position. The observer retains its integrity as an information processing unit in spite of its rapid expansion into space, while all we can say about the physical body is that it blinks off and on twice per oscillation at the points of rest. So as our bodies oscillate up and down about 7 times a second, the observer expands at the end of each movement for an extremely short period of objective time, then contracts unaware of the event. In other words, our angle momentarily opens up and closes again, back and parallel with objective time. This would happen about 14 times a second since we have 2 points of rest per cycle. Normally, we retain no memory of the event. However, the observer can cover long distances within this very short period of time and observe many things. No wonder, then, that he can be off to a distant beach and be back in a few seconds. As our ability to hold and expand state of consciousness increases, the angle does not close and become zero, but fluctuates at some distance from the object-time axis. This increases our subjective time so that we can start remembering some information we have received while out of the body. From all the above, it follows that we may describe a person's level of consciousness by the ratio of his subjective time to his objective time. The range of these ratios is very broad. It starts with small differences, which normally would be taken for just a wandering of attention, our little experiment with the clock, to hypnotic time dilation to dreaming, which is clearly an altered state of consciousness, and finally to a deep meditative state in which time is stopped or almost stopped. We can express this in a simple mathematical form. Level of consciousness index equals subjective time over objective time, or take our example from figure 25. Subjective time equals 4 seconds over objective time equals 1 second equals 4 over 1 equals 4. This is our level of consciousness index. We have not up to this point focused on what is happening to our subjective space coordinate, which rotates together with the subjective time coordinate. As the subjective time stretches, so does the observer expand into his subjective space. Remember, the space coordinate represents 3-dimensional space. After tunneling from our time-like to the space-like dimension, our space axis approaches the objective time axis. This carries with it some startling consequences. Our time-like subjective space is becoming objective time. This means that our observer, as he travels in what he considers his space, is actually moving through his own and other people's objective time, either into the past or into the future. This may perhaps explain the mechanism by which clairvoyants operate. They seem to be able to describe the past, some of them surprisingly well. They may even possibly predict the future, but since the future is made up of probabilities dependent on human free will, such travel into the future would be rather vague and unreliable. Figure 27. When one asks a clairvoyant how he does his thing, he answers, "I'm going into your past." He has a feeling of moving through time. Time is space for him. Let us return to our experiment with the clock. I have asked you to visualize a favorite activity. This automatically programmed your observer to move into the past because your favorite activity can only be an experience of the past. Your observer moved into the past and was off to a beach in a wink and back in another wink. He went in his subjective time and space into a different reality. One can consider projecting one's observer into the future if this is not too strenuous. Again, time will slow down. All this sounds very confusing at first. However, It's a rather simple and compact way of explaining many puzzling phenomena to which there are, as yet, no scientific explanations. What then does reality consist of? How do we see reality in the light of all this? Okay. Our solid and not so solid realities. Let's go back to the pendulum, which is our body. It oscillates up and down about 7 times a second. Each time the body comes to a rest 14 times a second, the observer expands at a very high speed through his subjective time into objective space. This explanation takes practically no time. Figure 28 describes the relationship between our different realities. Our solid physical reality goes on as usual except for tiny pauses during which our observer takes off and comes back. During the out periods in the other dimensions or realities, an untrained observer comes back without communicating any knowledge of his outing to the mind and the brain. In other words, this experience does not normally reach the conscious thinking level. A very good example of this is so-called subliminal advertising. This was a technique used some years ago by which products were advertised in the movie theaters or on television by flashing for a very short time a message on the screen. The public was never aware of what was happening since the message was too short to activate the conscious mind into producing a coherent thought image. But the subconscious mind, being much quicker, did pick up the message, and people dutifully consumed the advertised products. These techniques have fortunately since been outlawed, I bet. A trained observer, the one who can stay at a high level of consciousness for a while, has, as shown before, managed to stretch his subjective time considerably. Naturally, he may be able to observe and be imprinted with the information he sees. Then, upon his return, he may formulate the imprinted visions into thoughts. While one is in an expanded state of consciousness, his reality diagram differs from that of Figure 28 and looks rather like Figure 29. If you notice the top line, his other reality has become as continuous and stretched out as his physical reality. He is spending as much time there as on the physical level, not in actual objective time. He should therefore be able to make a coherent picture of his experiences and describe what he sees there. The development of the ability to retain the information will be explained in the coming chapters. We haven't until now used the 7 Hertz rate of motion of the body as a trigger for the ejection of the observer. Hold on. But as you remember from Chapter 3, any oscillator will tend to disappear and reappear at its own rate. The atoms of our bodies are such oscillators, they vibrate at a rate of about 10 to the 15th hertz. It is possible that our bodies blink on and off at this very high rate. There is no way of knowing whether this is so since presently we have no way of registering such rapid phenomena. However, we cannot assume that all the atoms in our bodies beat synchronously or coherently. We have to visualize our bodies blinking on and off gradually, different areas disappearing, others appearing. In other words, we are partially out all the time. This does not, however, alter the basic model presented here, since it does not matter how long the on and off periods are. In the unlikely event that total coherency occurs in the body, this may occur at very high levels of consciousness, then naturally the whole body will blink off and on as a unit, and we may expect to see some very unusual things occurring in such a state. We took the 7 Hertz pulsation as the minimum number of on and off periods, since that is a measurable figure. Summary. An experiment with time shows that we have objective and subjective space-time, which normally coincide. Under altered states of consciousness, these two become separated and we can function in our subjective space-time. This explains many phenomena such as clairvoyance, telepathy, etc. We postulate an observer, which is our psyche, and which becomes omnipresent for a very short period of time. This is the time required for the pendulum or oscillator to change its direction of motion. Our bodies are oscillators, and the atoms making up our bodies are also oscillators. Therefore, we expand into a space-like dimension many times a second very rapidly and collapse back as rapidly, possibly at the rate of atomic vibration. However, in an altered state of consciousness, we can expand our subjective time greatly. This allows us to observe the action of other psyches that are out there at a leisurely pace and bring back useful information from there. This is done without using up much objective time. So our reality is made up of a constant rapid back and forth shuttling between our solid reality and the way out realities which we share with everybody else. An expanded or higher state of consciousness implies an expansion of our psyche into space.